Thank you all for coming and being here with us today for the HBA of Durham, Orange, and Chatham County's Housing and Development Summit. My name is Lee Bowman. I'm a principal at Legion Land and Development, and I also serve as the 2023 HBA DOC Board President. I'm extremely proud of this summit, as the first one we did earlier in the year provided some incredible insights as to how we might consider growing as a region. Our intent for this program is to provide an important space for conversations, and sometimes they might get a little bit controversial, but enlightening and educational discussions about the state of our industry and our region. So I'm very grateful that you all chose to be here with us this morning. Before we dive into the program, it's important to thank the sponsors of this event. Without such support, we would not be able to bring you the best in our industry and on these related topics. Our breakfast sponsor this morning, sorry, y'all. Test, test. I'll try to yell. Our breakfast sponsor for the morning is Boss Custom Homes. Thank you to Rex, Evan, and their team for their generous support. Thank you to Tim Sievers and his crew at Quinty for being today's community sponsor. And I'd also like to acknowledge the following companies who's purchased a full table for today's program: Legion Land and Development, McAdams, Pabst Design Group, Thomas & Hutton, and Wilkinson Plumbing Supply. We're pleased and wish to give a special welcome today to our elected officials that are here. From the North Carolina General Assembly, Senator Natalie Murdock. I had not seen her, but is she here today? Yeah. Not yet. And I did see Representative Renee Price. Thank you. From the City of Raleigh, is Councilmember Jane Harrison and Megan Patton. Are they here? From the Orange County Board of Commissioners, Sally Green. Over there, Sally, thank you. From the town of Chapel Hill, Mayor Pam Heminger and Camille Berry. Thank you all for coming. From the town of Hillsborough, Commissioner Matt Hughes. There we go, Matt. Thank you. From the Durham City Council, Leonardo Williams. There's Leonardo. From Pittsburgh Board of Commissioners, Kyle Ship. From the Chatham County Board of Commissioners, Karen Howard. I hope I got everyone. Did I miss any elected officials? All right, thank you all for being here. There are also several staff that are present here today from our municipalities, and I'll forego reading everyone's name. So if you're staff from one of our municipalities, please stand so we can recognize you. Stand. I see Dan. Come on, staff. Come on, staff. Again, it's with a great amount of pride that we bring this Housing and Development Summit to our region. We do things a little bit differently here at the HBA of Durham, Orange, and Chatham counties, and this summit is a perfect example of what you can expect from our association and our leadership. At this time, I'd like to invite all of the HBA's current and past board members to please stand to be recognized. Thank you. So, once again, the idea of this summit was brought to us, and this is the first time we've had it this year. We had one back earlier in the year, but the idea and the concept was brought to us by one of our board members, Evan Boston, who at this time was a relatively new board member. He did receive unanimous support from our board to bring this idea to fruition. So at this time, I'd like to ask Evan to come up, say a few words about the summit, and then introduce our speaker. Thank you. Test.
Testing 1, 2. Oh man, I got the magic touch. All right, thank you. Thank you, Lee. And thank you to the Sheraton for the AV support. As chair of the Housing and Development Summit Committee, I'd like to start off by thanking the committee members that came alongside me and believed in this mission to bring this content to you guys. So thank you, George Lenny, Eric Chupp, Melissa Ortiz, Lee Bowman, and the CEO, Holly Fricaro of the HBA DOC. Thank you. So it's the HBA DOC's goal to continue these summits into 2024 and beyond, and we want to continue bringing thought-leading content and in-person collaboration. At the first event, the Q&A session was just as important as the presentation. So we want to continue that so that we can be better equipped to go into our workplaces and where we have influence in the community, in our neighborhoods. At session 1 back in March, we had Chuck Marone of Strong Towns, and he started us off with a 30,000 foot view macro analysis of our peculiar place in history, how many disparate societal problems kind of become clear and in focus through the lens of the American suburban experiment, and who might argue is entering its end stages. And you may have walked away from session, well, first of all, who was at session 1? All right, repeat offenders, thank you. So you may have walked away from session 1 with more questions than answers, but I'll share 2 of my big takeaways from session 1. No neighborhood should be exempt from the next increment of development intensity. No neighborhood should be frozen under amber and subject to no change moving forward, and that's something that becomes a recurring theme, and we'll certainly talk about it today. And we need to become closer with our neighbors, and that was something that really struck me. It came up during the Q&A at session 1. Someone was like, Chuck, how do we get started? We're so far from all of this stuff that you've just described. What's step 1? And he said, go talk to your neighbors. Go meet the people that live and share the same place as you. And so I'm happy to share that with that charge, my wife and I hosted a successful block party in June. We hosted it in our front yard. Thanks to building setbacks, we had plenty of space. So we had cornhole and people it was a potluck, people brought food. I met so many cool people that live within walking distance of my house. Jen was there. It was an amazing time. So go meet your neighbors. If you haven't done that yet, that is still step 1. So today, before I introduce Mitchell, let's talk about, so part of the mission that we want to do here with the Housing and Development Summit moving forward, and we did this in March and we did it last night. We want to make a walking tour a part of every single one of these events. So last night we had the privilege of joining one of our panelists, Bob Chapman, and he took us through one of his developments in Durham.
There it went.
Nope. Nope. So we went to Trinity Heights, and we had a really, really nice time walking through a neighborhood that if you walked by it today and didn't know any better, you'd say it's 100 years old, 120 years old. And Bob, I believe you had to break several zoning codes and rules to achieve that.
I'm sort of sorry I did that.
So please just stay connected with us for the next event in 2024, and if you're interested in joining the walking tour, that will be a part of our mission for every one of these. And then thanks to Dram and Draft in Durham for hosting the social hour afterwards, which is always really fun, and they do a great job. So with that, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker and get us kicked off this morning. I have the honor of introducing a highly accomplished and acclaimed urban planner that we're fortunate to call a local. He's going to help us zoom in on specific reforms and challenges that our ecosystem of municipalities is facing. Mitchell Silver is an award-winning planner with more than 38 years of experience. He's internationally recognized for his leadership and contributions to contemporary planning issues. He's a prolific public speaker specializing in comprehensive planning, placemaking, and implementation strategies. He served as the commissioner for New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. He was the chief planning officer in Raleigh and served as president of the American Planning Association and president of the American Institute of Certified Planners. He's one of the nation's most celebrated urban thinkers. He's been honored as one of the top 100 city innovators in the world by UBM Future Cities, and the Urban Times named him one of the top international thought leaders of the built environment. So with that, please give a warm welcome to our speaker this morning, Mitchell Silver.
Thank you. Let's see how
Thank you all
long
for
my
your
luck goes.
patience.
So I just flipped it off and back on.
IT.
Okay.
So if it
Well, good morning, everyone. It's certainly a pleasure to be back here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Moved back to Raleigh, North Carolina, but I'm glad to be back in North Carolina in the Triangle. I want to share with you a little story because, as you all know, I was plan director between 2005 and 2014 when New York City called me back. And I remember, I was kind of like saying, Parks, I'm a planner, and a lot of my friends literally said, you traitor, how could you leave planning and go to Parks? And that really, hurt my feelings. And so after being on the job a couple of years, we had a plan conference in New York, and I realized something about parks. People literally hug you for opening up a park, and I'm sure the elected officials know that. And I told the planners that. I said, something, people literally hug you for opening up a park. No one in my entire life ever hugged me for creating a comprehensive plan. So if you want a hug, open up a park. All right, so I talk with my hands. This will be a challenge to do both. So I'm going to talk about hindsight, insight, foresight. Is kind of the journey. When I was plan director, I will be using Raleigh as a case study in Wake County. I recognize it's a different county, but I want you to look at the principles, the approaches that were used, and see how they relate to your local jurisdiction. Now, Lee said it, this will be, some points, a difficult conversation, but a necessary conversation. As a New Yorker, I tend to talk very straight, but I think it's something that we just need to have this very, very important conversation. So with that, let me get started. And again, I'm very thankful to be here. A lot of lessons were learned when I moved from New York to North Carolina. I wanted to make sure I understood the local culture. I believe it's important you know the anatomy and soul of a place as well as the physical environment. But the one thing I realized when I came to North Carolina is that this place is growing. Growth, growth, growth was the top issue I heard when I arrived here, and it continues to this very day. As you can see, these are numbers from 2021. Raleigh is the top real estate. The Raleigh metro area, which does include this region, is one of the fastest real estate markets in the country. And it continues year after year. A lot of people say, I moved here, but I don't want to grow. It is going to be inevitable because if you look at the metros over the past 13 years, this metro is number 2 on the list. And so we have to be able to communicate to our residents, to our stakeholders, that this region is going to grow and it's going to continue to grow, and we have to learn how to manage it. Saying no is not an option. We have to work and manage all of that growth. Now, why are people moving to this region? We have North American Moving Services every year. They talk about what are these migration trends, why are people moving here. I can tell you that COVID escalated people moving here, but the number one top reason is quality of life. Same as 2021, and that continues in 2022. People want to move closer to outdoor experiences, and because of COVID, the continuation of remote at work. Another one is lowering tax liability, both property and income tax. And then, as you can see, the last line, the flexibility of more remote work or early retirement. The 55 pluses are coming, they have cash, and they're looking for these experiences as they move to this region. And if you want to know where they're coming from, no surprise, California, Illinois, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, those are the outbound places, and Pennsylvania replaced New York in 2022. So, Evan, you said meet your neighbor. Most likely, they're not going to be from here. They're going to be from one of these states. So get to know them quite well. In all this backdrop, I also want to share with you some other trends that we're dealing with. When I was plan director, I had to communicate that these trends affect what we do. And we, in our business, have to watch these emerging trends like a stockbroker watches the market. It influences the places that we plan. And so whether it's the graying and browning of America, the rise of single-person households, which I'll share some information in a second, extreme weather, droughts. I'm looking what's happening out in the West and Southwest. My stepdaughter just moved to New Mexico. I call her every day, are you still alive? Did you melt? I mean, I don't know how to endure. And we have an office in Texas, McAdams. I got to go there in a couple of weeks. I am terrified. The last time I was there, it was well over 100 degrees. And it's multiple days. And so these are issues we're trying to address, and then you see all the other issues. And of course, housing affordability or attainability has been on this list for decades, and it's not going away. So with all this backdrop, our role, what we want to do is plan and build great places. And so one of the challenges in the role of planning is that we are to manage growth and change. It is inevitable. If you say I don't want to grow, you might as well say you don't want it to rain. It is inevitable. But our job is to provide a blueprint for growth. And when I came to Raleigh, we're growing fast, we need a plan. And I said, look, I can give you a blueprint. The question is, can you follow it? So many residents said, we need a plan. We're growing, we need a plan. You have a plan. But the challenge is, can you follow it? And that's what we'll get into this conversation. Because to me, the role of planning is to offer predictability and certainty for stakeholders, for decision makers, and for the development community, so they know exactly what's coming next. My biggest frustration is when, well, I'll get to the next slide in a second, is trying to determine, here's a piece of land, what's going to happen. To put people at ease, to know there's a plan, to know what is happening, to me is the best gift that you can give your residents, decision makers, developers, and there it goes. We got through 4 slides. Can everybody hear me? I'm going to use my projecting.
Test, test.
Okay.
Test, test.
All right. Sorry. And this is one point which was, this was one point that was always a challenge to communicate. And I had to tell people, when you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else. And I was in a period in Raleigh where all people wanted were single family homes, 4 units to the acre. We didn't want multifamily. I'm saying if you're saying no to multifamily, you're saying seniors, people with disabilities, young professionals, we don't want you in our community. Because they didn't want to buy a home, they couldn't afford to buy a home. When you say no, you're saying yes to something else. We'll go through some examples of exactly what this means. Another point I like to communicate to cities and towns and counties is there are 2 types of places. There are plan-making places that follow a plan, and then there are deal-making places where everything is transactional. And I can tell you, because people know about conditional use zoning, it's all about the deal. There's nothing wrong with deal-making, but plan-making is predictable. People know what's going to happen. For me as plan director, the most frustrating thing is where Jim Anthony comes to my office and said, hey, what can I do with this piece of property? I have no idea. You submit an application, it's consistent with the zoning, it goes through the process, and I have no idea what's going to happen. Either you're a plan-making city or you're a deal-making city. And I remember I went to Charlotte and shared this same message, and a lot of them I asked you, which one of you, and the crowd screamed out, deal-making. It's unpredictable. It's comfortable for some because it's like, you know something? We can get approval, but it's very difficult because you want to know, what can I do on that property? So to me, that's quite key. And ask yourself, which one is your jurisdiction? So we're going to talk about this blueprint for growth. I was very honored when I came to Raleigh. We're growing, we need this blueprint. And I said, okay, the first thing we had to do was take a step back and do what's called a land capacity analysis. And I will need a glass of water. Yes.
I got it.
So what is a land capacity analysis? We know we're going to grow. What you want to do is find out how much land, developable land, not land you could redevelop, exists in your jurisdiction. In our case, back in 2010, there was roughly about 20,000 acres. And Raleigh was absorbing about 1,000 acres a year of 4 units to the acre in addition to commercial, which meant we had 20 years of growth before land would run out. We knew that was an option. We had to find places to develop 120,000 dwelling units. That was what we're expecting over the next 20 years. So I want you to keep that in mind. That is a goal. We're growing. You want a blueprint. The demand is for 120,000 units. Thank you. Where is it going to go? And the public understood that. And so we knew that low density, 4 units to the acre, was no longer going to work. We had to find places of concentrating density or places where people can live in order to manage our growth. And it wasn't just Raleigh. We had this regional exercise. ULI came in. We looked at the Triangle region, recognized we're going to grow by 1.2 million people, create 700,000 jobs, and we came up with this exercise to figure out where it can go. Is everybody familiar with the ULI Lego exercise? Basically, yellow is residential, red is commercial. They give you a map of the region, and you have to put the Lego, You cannot leave any left on the table to show where it goes. And I was at this table, which actually was selected as the top choice, called Vibrant Centers. And at that table, people were struggling. I don't want to put residential there. I don't want to put, and we eventually figured it out by concentrating density at key locations so that we can preserve low density and the natural features which are important to preserve. And so that's something that we have to keep in mind. I really credit this region for planning regionally. Not every region does that because, again, there are no boundaries when it comes to growth. So when I was in Raleigh, we had to talk about some of the key issues. We're starting this blueprint, growing very fast at the time, 12 to 15,000 net growth per year. We still had a small town mentality. As I said, we'd run out of land to develop within 20 years. Sprawl was fiscally irresponsible. There were demographic shifts that we were not talking about at the time. And so we knew we had to address these issues. And the last one is that Raleigh or Leaseway County did not offer housing, transportation, or lifestyle choices to choose from. I remember I was getting criticized, oh, you're a planner, why do you live in a suburban home? Because when I moved to Raleigh, I had two choices, to live in a suburban home or to live in a suburban home. So I chose a suburban home. Another reality which we started talking about back in 2008 was looking at the demographics about how it influences our housing development. Because at the time, we were stuck in just single-family homes. This is stuff you already know. People are living longer. There are more people with disabilities. We're seeing the rise of both multi-generational households, which is the sandwich generation plus post-COVID. And then we're seeing more single mothers, single-headed households. And of course, the one that frightens everybody is that there'll be no majority race by 2050. But I want to focus on this rise of the sole person household. It's not just the widowers. If you look at it, Gen Z 3%, millennials 19%, Gen X 19%, and then boomers 39%. People are looking for smaller homes. They're looking to rent. And this is showing you what the market looks like for now and the foreseeable future. So, to start the process, Raleigh, we want to have public engagement. We got the millennials through this Big Ideas Forum. We even got the kids involved at Marbles Kids Museum. We got the kids active to understand the importance of planning. This thing was called Kid City. We laid out tapes with all these lots in a Marbles floor. You can build a box and put your project on a lot, but you had to get a permit first. It was so cute. You tell a little kid is not zoned for that, and the parents are looking at us like saying, how could you do this to my child? You can go to the Board of Adjustment, they're just right over there. Make your appeal. We did that, for real. And it was educational, but the parents, they were not very happy about that. And because these were very difficult topics and uncomfortable conversations, we decided to have a lecture series. And I was surprised. People from Wilmington to Greensboro came to Raleigh. I mean, we got some of the top speakers, Donald Shoup, Bob Severo, Christopher Lineberger, because we wanted to have these conversations so we won't have these battles at every zoning case. Let's talk about the big picture. Let's talk about what is a 21st century city, because no one was talking about that term back in 2005, 2006. We wanted to bring people in, have these conversations so that they would understand before we started the planning process what we're talking about. Things like, how do you design a 21st century city? How do you get there from here? How do we create a pedestrian-friendly city? And then traditional codes versus form-based codes. And it took off. This was a conversation. We didn't do a process of the campaign. And I was stunned when the News and Observer did an entire Sunday supplement just on talking about what will Raleigh look like in 2030. People were engaged, they were active, they wanted to. They did an update Raleigh. These themes have stood the test of time. Economic prosperity and equity, yes. In 2009, we used the word equity, but it was not controversial. Expanding housing choices, and all that you see. So we took these themes, and this became the framework for our blueprint.
we decided to concentrate the density along 8 growth centers and 12 multimodal corridors, where 60 to 70% of all new growth would be at those locations. And if you're familiar with Raleigh, here is, whoops, wrong one. Is this it? So here is downtown, there is Midtown, there was West Raleigh, and we were hoping we'd have transit, and then the multimodal corridors, that 60 to 70% of all growth would go there. And we have to urbanize. It doesn't have to be high rises, it could just be more density, and that was our approach. We knew we'd have to expand downtown south, north, and west, but we wanted to offer predictable patterns of growth. If you're in those yellow areas, relax. There's no encroachment, there's no big development. You can live in a nice, low-density lifestyle, but the other areas expect change. Expect change. I was so pleased that now people said, wow, imagine Raleigh without sprawl. And we're able to make that transition, and then we translated, this from Bob Garrett. You notice that too? It's from Bob Garrett. Imagine Raleigh, because our nickname was Sprawling, I don't know if you knew that. So it was sprawling. Don't laugh, some people make the same fun of you too. So then we translated that to the land use. So when people came in for an application, they would say, ah, you're consistent with. Because remember, we got to reach that 120,000 units in 10 years. We provided the blueprint and the roadmap, but then we got in zoning cases, consistency with plan in plans. While it was important to reach those targets, people started looking at various pieces. Really, for consistency without the plan, people were looking for inconsistency to deny it. And that, unfortunately, is a trend that we're seeing today. People are nitpicking things, saying, I don't want this case, I'm going to find a way of denying it, challenging our target of 120,000 units we want to reach in 20 years. Because when you start denying those cases, the demand doesn't change. It starts going into low-density neighborhoods. You deny a 20-story building or a 50-story building, that demand goes into neighborhoods. And people will start buying a property to redevelop because the demand is there. So we provided a blueprint. Our hope was that we'd follow it. Oh, it's here. So, plan was adopted. Now it says, okay, how are we going to implement this plan? Policy guidance and actions, development code, which was the next step, and then capital projects. We were very committed to create great places in Raleigh. Placemaker will tell you every region should have 10 things to do, 10 places with 10 things to do within each destination. Are we good?
Yeah.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Nicole. And we wanted to use this also to create great places, because we want to tell people that planning is not just this document, it's a book. Planning is about places. It's creating a dynamic entertainment center. Now having a new Midtown, Hillsborough Street transformed, that's planning. And so we want to make that clear connection, but then we had to make sure we focused on the rules. And we called it right rules and right places. Now I have to tell you, as a planner, I hate rules. I loved breaking rules and finding rules because I have found in my career some of the best ideas, some of the most creative solutions are illegal. Chuck Marone, my good friend, said the same thing. I can tell you, like I was just talking to Jim, there's now this new concept called RV urbanism, where they're now letting people live, it's affordable, in RVs and not the trailer homes, tiny homes, micro homes. But in most places, the most innovative solutions to solve our housing crisis are illegal. And we set the rules, so I don't like rules. To me, I look at the objective and whatever I need to do to tweak and change or modify the rules. So it's not that the project is wrong, the rules are wrong. So that's something we have to get in. So our objective when we did this process was right rules, right places. We wanted to have urban solutions in urban locations and suburban solutions in suburban locations. And so we wanted to, as I said, increase predictability for citizen developers, offer flexibility to developers because
The market changed, technology changed, COVID changed things. And we want to give our developers an ability to pivot and change what they do, streamline the process, and make it easier to do the right thing. I'll never forget when I came to Raleigh, all the city council said, we want more urban product. I said, no, you don't. They says, why? Because your rules to do it is so hard, forget it. I might as well develop in a greenfield development because it's just easier to do. We made the things we want to do hard. We have to make, if we truly want it and incentivize it, make it easy. So we did this deep dive, this diagnostic report to show how our code was broken, and the consultants were rough. They just told us what it was. We want to make sure, as we organized, we wanted to focus on mixed-use places, rules for older areas, and fix our process. There were hot topics. No surprise, affordable housing, maximum limits, height limits, conditional use zoning, which I kind of call modern-day crack. You know, we're addicted to it, we can't get off of it, but we need it. It's just one of those challenges that we have. Cluster subdivisions, tree protection, infill, density and form. These were all the hot topics that we discussed during our comprehensive planning process that we carried over now into the coding process, which made them law. To a hybrid form-based code, and I know other jurisdictions are following suit. That was initially adopted in 2013, and then a couple of tough years of doing text changes and tweaking it to get it just right, even though I'm hearing there's still a number of record text changes happening in Raleigh. So rather than going to units per acre, we went more to a context-based, form-based approach. We came up with different flavors so people could actually see what it looks like. You know, it's hard for someone to visualize a 4 FAR or 4 units to the acre. Someone knows what a 3-story building looks like. We even went further and went very creative with these frontage requirements to show exactly the predictability for developers, for elected officials, for citizens, of what the building would look like and how it would be placed on the public realm. And then we actually hired a special consultant from Colorado to come to North Carolina to help us what we call these transition zones. What happens between a high-density building in a low-density neighborhood or a shopping center and a low-density neighborhood? We came up with these transition zones. Within 200 feet, this is what you can put inside. Or if you had a taller building, how you transition down to the neighborhood, because that was a hot topic that everybody was concerned about. Then our approval process. You want to see what it was like in Raleigh? It was so exciting. I did fit them all on one sheet. We had 22 steps. Seriously? 22 steps. We want development to happen. We want affordable housing. But this was what we had to make someone go through. It made absolutely no sense. So we cleaned it up. Now, I haven't been here for 10 years, so tell me, has the process improved? Oh, no? That's not the answer I wanted to hear. And we did put in a code to make it very easy and simple. Now, some of you may remember this from years ago when I was here, but I think for some newcomers, it's very important to understand the importance of understanding the value of land, because this is crucial to that goal I told you of reaching that 120,000 units over that 20 years. Most people don't understand, well maybe they do, that land equals property and sales tax revenue. Particularly for legislators and elected officials, this is something you control. It's a finite resource. And how you zone it increases or decreases its value. That's your call. And you have a finite boundary unless you can annex areas in. It is a, I don't want to be crude, a commodity. And so planning policy and zoning affects and controls the value and the revenue it generates. That's all of you. And so I want all of you to think very differently and be smarter about how you create the value of land. So when I was in Raleigh, I was getting frustrated. You're focusing on downtown, these urban products, what are you doing? So I came up with this simple example. It would take 600 single-family homes on 150 acres to equal the tax value of one of our high-rises downtown that sits on 1.2 acres. So I can use 150 acres on 1 acre to equal the same tax value. In fact, that Wells Fargo building downtown has 90 times the tax value as the average suburban acre. Simple math. Most people who are making decisions don't consider this. They'd rather hear what, not that it's not unimportant, what the neighbors are saying and stormwater and trees. Yes, that is all important. But ultimately, you're controlling the commodity, the value of an acre in your jurisdiction. Take it a step further. That downtown high-rise on a 3-acre site pays off its infrastructure in 3 years. Return on investment, 35%. A suburban multifamily complex on 30 acres takes 42 years to pay off its infrastructure. Return on investment, 2%. So if you're a business person, you have to understand you control the value of land, which has a direct correlation to sales tax, if it has retail, or property tax. So a colleague of mine, Urban 3 in Asheville, gave me this example, and he said, let's just break it down on a per acre basis. The Walmart sits on 34 acres, that downtown 6-story building sits on a ½ acre. The real estate taxes the Walmart collects on a per acre basis, $6,500. That downtown mixed-use building, 10 times the amount. 10 times. Oh, what about jobs? Oh yeah, on a per acre basis, Walmart produces 6 jobs per acre. That downtown building, 74. So we have to understand, as you zone and what you allow changes your tax base. So we take a look at Raleigh, Walmart, there it is, 2,000 on an annual basis. Single-family residential, 2,800. A 6-story mixed-use building in Raleigh was 110,000 per acre downtown. So I encourage all of you to consider that as you're doing the work. So I had to communicate this to residents in a way they can visualize it. So as you can see here, the darker the blue, the more value per acre, but you couldn't see it in 2 dimensions, so I asked staff to put it in 3 dimensions. And there it is. Can you tell me where the most value is? Downtown and Midtown. So this was important because I want to make sure that downtowns and midtowns and more urban areas takes the tax load. Otherwise, as a single property owner, I'll pay the tax load. No. I want it to be carried by more dense locations. Now I have to confess, just let me kind of cry here for a second. I really was hoping that we'd have light rail here in our region. It didn't happen, but here's one of the maps someone came up with. Had we started doing it, this is what our light rail system would have looked like. And I'm so jealous of Charlotte's South End. This is the kind of development that light rail would have produced. We did have a plan in Raleigh, and here are some of the stations. And just to show you, had we done this, this is what the ROI would have looked like. It would have kept taxes stable, in fact, keep it lower, because all of that land, so when people say no to density, what they're really saying is, I'll pay more taxes. If that's what you want to say, I'm okay with that. But that's just show you the growth potential had that light rail system taken off. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some housing choices and affordability. This is something that most people may get a little bit uncomfortable. I don't think so. Very often we hear about housing affordability. People blame home builders, they blame developers. But I want to share with you something that people during the period of 2020 to 2022, kind of the height of COVID, we saw the market go crazy, people moving to our region from all different places. Look at the number of homes sold during that period. Over 72,000, and most over the asking price. Individual homeowners, under their God-given right, sold property, and look at what the impact was, in just 2-3 years, increased the median home price by $122,000. Not a developer, homeowners. And those increases translated to the rental market. And so the point that I'm making is that, let me just give an example. Okay, Nicole, you're a smart planner now, a big CEO of a downtown. Your home is worth $300,000. I'm now going to say, no, Nicole, I'm going to give you $450. I'm going to give you $500. And you're going to say, no, I'm not going to take it. I'm going to put it on the sale price. No, you're not. You're going to take it for the highest and best offer as I would. Are you greedy? No. No. But that's what we say about developers. This is what is affecting our affordability issue, because desirable markets where people want to live will always have an affordability problem. Let me repeat that. Desirable places to live and desirable markets will always have an affordability problem because people want to go there and are willing to pay a premium. The implication is prices go up, rents go up, and people have to move further away. Now, the solutions, as we know, there are creative solutions about affordability. They're now looking at things like cottage courts, land trusts, accessory dwelling units, and now the hot topic people are talking about, the missing middle. Doesn't have to be high-rise, and I'm sure, how many know what missing middle is? I don't have to go through a definition. All right, for those that don't know, missing middle, it's that housing between the single-family detached and apartments. It's your duplex, triplex, fourplex, townhomes, small apartments. This is now a growing trend filling the market because government's doing the right thing. They're putting out affordable housing bonds. They're doing low-income housing tax credits. They are deregulating rules to make it easier to do. And this is what the missing middle looks like. And now more and more places are allowing this type of housing in single-family zones. Very controversial, but they want to make sure it fits and blends in with the context. I want to thank Bob because we went to Trinity Heights, and this is an example of missing middle right here in Durham. This is some of Bob's pictures, some are mine. Great project. And then these are ADUs. I mean, they look great. You can go there yourself. It's not that far from here. And here's an example of the primary resident and another ADU. Blends right in and fits right into the environment. So this part of the conversation is going to get a little bit uncomfortable, but I think it's important. And one of the biggest trends I'm now dealing with in my profession, what I'm being hired for, is this issue about repairing past harm, or what we call restorative justice. And the goal is to learn to avoid making new harm. We're finding out, particularly in black communities, that there are a lot of unjust planning practices, both past and present. We know about redlining, segregation, urban renewal plans, but you're going to hear very often issues about gentrification and displacement and predatory buyers. Now, my recommendation, if this is an issue in your jurisdiction, do a plan and a policy in advance, because if you don't, what's going to happen is every zoning case, you're going to relitigate displacement and gentrification. It becomes a default concern, and I see this again and again, is that try to get ahead of it if this is an issue, because in some cases this is very real. Where property taxes go up, people feel they're being forced out. You get ahead of it, go in advance and address it, because this is very, very real versus dealing it on a case-by-case, zoning case basis. Because the one thing you hear is you cannot develop, you're going to gentrify, you're going to displace. I encourage local governments to get ahead of this. As presidents of APA, we came up with 2 policy guides. To me, the word equity means fairness. That we had a guide for equity for planners, and most recently, earlier this year, we came up with an equity guide, fairness in zoning. And now this is free, you can download it. There are 3 kinds of zoning equity for zoning. One is the rules, one is the people or the map, or basically the what, the who, and the where. Now, I'll let you get into this yourselves, but it does talk about how do we provide more equity in zoning, from zoning to form to use to development standards. You can look at it, work with your staff to see how this fits the work that you do. It goes deeper into the zoning procedures, who's represented on the board, clear and objective equity-based standards and review criteria, and then finally the maps. So that is something that you certainly want to take a look at to address some of those disparities and make sure you don't have zoning maps that prohibit certain uses, particularly make more land available for different types of development. So I want to end on a high note. I love this region. It was formed by the Research Triangle Park, which put this region on the map of having government, business, and universities work together. So I'm a big fan of the big ideas and being visionary. Another presentation I often give is what are the 10 critical elements that will make tomorrow's communities. You invite me back another time, or they think there was one version online. But these are things that make us great. So I want to leave you with some inspirational messages about what's happening. I was the original visionary to map Downtown South, and now Kane is actually filling out Downtown South, which is now actually being constructed. If you hadn't seen it yet, Cary is doing probably one of the most amazing parks, I think, in North Carolina. It's currently under construction. It'll open up in December. And then Kane's doing a project, Smoky Hollow and the Line. This is the Innovation District in North Hills. Now, could you imagine if all these great projects were deemed illegal? Because these were not easy to do. These are the kind of projects we want to see, but we make our rules, make them almost difficult to do. Here's some images for the reimagined Research Triangle Park. And then I'm so proud even your region has this amazing, innovative project called Southern Village right here in our backyard. So as I conclude to bring up the panel, I just want to do 10 summary points. Really embrace the value of planning. Be a plan-making place, not a deal-making place. Follow your blueprint and have a plan that is predictable. Understand the implications of saying no. Focus on the right rules for the right places and make rules easy for what you want to see. Understand the value of land. Explore every tool to make housing affordable and attainable. Understand past harm, but also avoid making new harm. Consider equity, fairness in planning and zoning. And finally, be a visionary, embrace the big ideas, and continue to make our region great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mitch Silver. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're going to get a panel up here to transition to the next part of our presentation. And this is, I'm going to introduce our speakers that are coming up now. We're going to do a little Q&A. Just a little housekeeping. You will be able to download the slides. So feel free to continue taking pictures, but you can get a copy of those. Holly will send them out after the event. So welcoming to the panel, Colleen Wilger. Colleen is the Director of Urban Strategy in the Global Center of Excellence for Urban Analytics at AECOM. In her role, Colleen helps formalize data-driven planning and technology, influence capital programs and private investment in sustainability, resiliency, and equity. Over the past 2 decades, Colleen has led and managed change initiatives, including comprehensive and place-based planning, that's a tough one, community engagement, and research analysis to advance equity, economic vitality, vibrancy, in diverse communities. Prior to her time at AECOM, Colleen held senior leadership roles in municipal government, including serving as Director of Planning for Chapel Hill, right here, Associate Director of Neighborhood Planning, and Acting Deputy Director for DC, Office of Planning. She has extensive experience building teams, reinvigorating practices, and strategically repositioning agencies for success. So we're happy to have you, Colleen. We also are welcoming Bob Chapman to the panel. He's the founder and managing director of Traditional Neighborhood Development Partners of Durham. He has over 30 years of development experience with built projects in North Carolina, Florida, Arkansas, and Missouri. He was one of only 25 developers in the country invited to sign the Charter of New Urbanism in 1996. He's been at it for a while. He was founding chair of the North Carolina Smart Growth Alliance and the National Town Builders Association. Bob currently serves on the boards of Southern Urbanism and Central Park School for Children. He served on the boards of the Congress for New Urbanism, the Seaside Institute, as well as Duke School for Children, the Carolina Theater, Preservation Durham, St. Joseph's, Historic Foundation, and Friends of the Duke Art Museum. So thank you, Bob. And moderator of our panel, good friend of mine, Jen Truman. She is a neighbor. Like I said earlier, she came to my block party. Pretty cool. She's an independent design consultant with experience in architecture, civil engineering, and interior design. She provides her services to architecture firms, developers, and contractors. Jen has a passion for designing experiences and places and believes in building things together. Jen was a 2022 winner of the American Institute of Architects National Associate Award to recognize her leadership and significant contributions to the community and architecture profession. She's vice chair of the Raleigh Transit Authority, a board member of the Fertile Ground Food Cooperative, and a co-founder of Triangle United Growers. And I added this in there. Her most recent venture, ADU Co., is a full-service accessory dwelling unit rental matchmaking and management company with the goal of linking homeowners who want to provide housing with renters who want to find neighborhood housing. So, thank you, Jen. Take it away.
Thanks for adding in the shameless plug. It's really great to be here this morning, and really difficult to follow Mitch Silver, who I've heard speak several times since I was a student, and I'm always learning something new every time, so thank you. What we're hoping to do with the discussion today is dig some more into the hard things that Mitch brought up, and everyone sitting here has a little bit of a different scale and perspective on some of the issues we're facing here locally. And we're going to start by digging in to the housing questions. I think Mitch gave us a good overview of the bigger growth problem. Many of you guys know this. Many of you guys are helping to solve the housing crisis and affordability crisis that we have locally. And so we're going to talk a lot about housing and zoning reform over the next little bit. Is that okay with y'all? Okay, good. So, you know, Mitch, you told us what missing middle means and what kind of building it is in terms of being duplexes and small apartments, that in-between stuff that we used to not be able to build really anywhere in the United States, and certainly not in the Triangle region. But that's changing. And I'm curious to start off to talk about not what's changed right now, but why. So to each of you, why do you think that this particular zoning reform around allowing missing middle and more housing types is really needed right now?
One of the best neighborhoods in Durham is generally thought of as Trinity Park. You could buy a house in Trinity Park not too many years ago for an affordable amount of money, and now it's out of sight. The zoning in Trinity Park in 1968, when we had a 16-page zoning code in Durham, was 70 families per acre. You didn't have to build a building that would accommodate 70 families. You could build anything you wanted to up to that limit. But that enabled people to build missing middle on nearly every block. And if you go to Trinity Park now, you'll see that there are apartment buildings. One of them on the corner of Trinity and Buchanan actually was non-conforming because it was built to 100 families per acre. You probably noticed that building. And they had to buy the house next door and take it down in order to make it conforming. But that was downzoned to, I think, 8 or 6 as neighborhoods and communities across America were when the Fair Housing Act was passed.
Well, as I stated, we are growing, and we have an affordable housing crisis. And as a result, all tools should be put on the table. There are vertical, very dense places to live, but also you could have it horizontal. And so missing middle is offering something that contextually can blend into a neighborhood, because you can see a lot of places in our region are low density. And so to urbanize it, you have the cottage court. You know, you have the ADUs. You have now the missing, well, I'm not saying not every place has missing middle, but it is a lower density option that allows more people to live in it, because as I stated, there's a demand for people to move here. And so it is just a necessary option that we have to move into, because predominantly most places are low density. 4 units to the acre, 6 units to the acre, 2 units to the acre, and we have to start opening it up because that demand is coming, and you don't want people to live further and further away from their place of employment. And so to me, it is a necessary tool that we have to use. And even the other options, people are exploring tinier homes. But in a crisis, you have to let innovation take its place and not make innovation illegal. So I recommend all options, from tiny homes to cottage courts to missing middle, to make sure we're providing places for people to live.
So I would say from the Chapel Hill perspective, we knew that what was happening was not aligned with our values. Our values were everyone is welcome, and we found that only 8% of town employees actually were able to afford to live in town. So we couldn't even house our own. So that was a big deal to us in Chapel Hill. How can we actually provide different types of housing? But we also were concerned about the type of housing that was coming online, and we weren't understanding, is that the housing we actually need? So we did a lot of research and study about multifamily housing versus single family. We were seeing both ends of the spectrum. And what we were realizing was the phase of life that we wanted to attract and retain in the town was actually not even able to be housed. So the families, the young professionals, the 55 and over that Mitch was talking about, that group actually didn't have a housing choice or housing type available in the town, and we couldn't even preserve what was there. So finding that lack of housing type was the first step, and then trying to deregulate or incentivize to provide that housing type was the next step. So for Chapel Hill, this is very applicable, and the different things that we'll get to in the next part of the discussion are the things that are hopefully going to help with that issue. But it was basically trying to be more equitable and trying to be aligned with our values of making sure that we could welcome everyone to Chapel Hill.
Thanks, y'all. I gotta be close.
Yes, please.
Okay. I gave them the questions ahead of time so they would have good answers for you guys. So I think we just set the stage with why, and then I think we also uniquely in the Triangle region have good news to share on this topic because we are making progress. Attending the Congress of New Urbanism, talking with other friends at the national level that are doing this work all over the country. We're not at the front, but we're not at the back either in making progress on these zoning reforms. So the next question is about, digging into some of the things we're excited about in the recent reforms that we've had. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page, because everyone's coming from a slightly different place. Durham in the last couple years had their expanding housing choices and enabled a lot more different sizes of houses and amount of houses to be built on each lot. Upcoming sequel to that is SCAD, which, as many of you know, is quite controversial and needs support in Durham right now. Chapel Hill also had housing choices for a complete community, which is just an amazing name for a policy, and really hits at the why, I think, that you were just speaking to. And then, of course, Raleigh has done several things, including really a missing middle 1.0 and 2.0 to recognize the first time we did it, it needed some tweaks, second time it was needed. And so what I find in my consulting work is many builders, homeowners, citizens don't know what you can build today that you couldn't have built a year or two ago in our towns. So I want to ask each of the panelists, what are you most excited about for the recent reforms that we have accomplished? Like, what can we do now that gets you excited?
Durham has made some wonderful advances, probably the very most effective was eliminating the parking requirement in downtown Durham, which took place many years ago, and you can see what the result has been. The other was ADUs have been legal in Durham since the late 90s, and that was a very forward-thinking thing. At Trinity Heights, we built the first 30 or so that had been built in the 15 or 20 or 30 years in Durham. I think there were 5 or 6 that we could find before then. And people who built one ended up making their entire cost of occupancy very reasonable. The mortgage payment on the main house was in the range of $850 a month, and grad students at Duke rented the granny flats on the second floor for $700 a month, so the net cost of occupancy in the whole thing was $200 a month or so. And it just made so much sense. I'm involved with the Simplifying Codes for Affordable Development, SCAD, effort. It's a list of several dozen practical, simple, common sense corrections to things that were popping up in the code after the expanded housing choices was implemented. And there has been an absolute tsunami of opposition in some quarters, particularly the Inter-Neighborhood Council and a few other places. And the mayor asked people who were sponsoring it, and the sponsors here, Jim Anthony agreed to stand up and be the one who actually filed the application, and we're very appreciative of that. But we would go and, at the mayor's request, meet with some of the key opponents. And at the last meeting, I said, we're not really disagreeing on anything. Every one of these points you seem to have no real issues with. What's the problem? And the main leader in the opponent group said, the problem is you didn't ask us. So I think it's more of an emotional, like who's in charge issue rather than, and being developers, we're obviously evil, venal, only in it for the money, all these bad things. The best thing about being a developer is you get all the privacy you want at cocktail parties. So.
I'm excited about two things. I don't know if you know, but we started the ADU journey in Raleigh in 2009, and it just got adopted in 2019. It took 10 years because of the same issue. When people are opposed to something, they get very, very, very creative in their opposition. So I'm very excited that that now is on the table, and now the city's holding forums on what it looks like and what you can do. I'm also very excited about the missing middle, whether it's 2.0. This now is a way of providing more density that is not scary to people, that is not super tall or moderate density, but gives people, to me, I don't like to use the word density, it's places for people to live in all stages of life. It is places for people to live, and stop demonizing, because I always tell people, let's just take rental for a second, and that always got me. How many people ever rented in your life? Should I be scared and roll up and leave this place? I mean, we don't think of this audience when we think of rental property. And so to me, the fact that we have missing middle, whether it's rental or ownership, to me, I'm very excited about because we have great creative designers here, great home builders here that can provide a great product. We saw the Trinity project yesterday, absolutely stunningly beautiful. Who would not want to live there? So I think to talk to people, talk to your neighbors, to demystify it, but ultimately, we're trying to find places for people to live. I was at a TBJ session 2 days ago, Mandy, and this woman was saying, I want my son, not to live in my house, to live in this region. But he has to drive an hour away. And that's who we have to keep in mind. It's not density, I don't want to use that word anymore, it's housing for people. Your grandmother, your son, your cousin, a young emerging family that cannot afford to buy a home because the interest rates are too high, that just needs a place to stay. We have to keep that in mind. The last point is, I believe when I was in government, my job was to protect the public interest, and far too often we're hearing about the self-interest. Localized concerns that are hurting projects, and we have an overall goal of creating a great city. It's the public interest to provide a great place, housing choices, but then we have a self-interested group that is now starting to affect a good thing. So, sorry to end on a bad note, but ADUs, Missing Middle 2.0, very excited about.
So one thing that I'm excited about and very proud that that Chapel Hill was able to accomplish during my tenure there was impacting the process. So Chapel Hill, I think we all know, is notorious for the process. I would have been delighted to have 22 steps. Our flow chart was like so large and long and complex, we had to put it on a plotter. Not joking, for real. And so what we found was, if we want to have development that is aligned with our priorities, if we want affordable housing and attainable housing, we have to open up. We have to figure out this process and streamline it. So what we did was a pilot process, a process for a process, and we looked at it and we said, okay, our normal review and entitlement process is 15, 18, sometimes 24 months on a good day. And if we are able to align that for low-income housing tax credits or other projects for affordable housing, what can we do to streamline it? So we looked at everything and we cut out all the fat and we were able to get it down to 6 months. So that means you can get a LIHTC project almost every cycle. That also means that if you are aligned with our priorities, it wasn't just for affordable housing, we were very specific in what we called it, the community priority process. If your project aligns with our priorities, let's kick it up. Let's make sure that it's streamlined and expedited and it gets done in 6 months. So that way it's aligned with the market need as well. A lot of the issues in Chapel Hill are the projects take so long that the market no longer needs what you're proposing by the time you get it done. We have had projects that have been 8, 9, 13 years old that get entitled. That's a junior high schooler. That is not okay. You know what I mean? Like, it's not okay. So the piece that I think is most important around affordable housing or attainable housing or whatever, process is a big part of it. And incentivizing and deregulating, like we said, that's very important. So I'm really proud that Chapel Hill was able to do that, and I'm hopeful that they'll be able to expand it to be beyond affordable housing and into other types of projects that align with their priorities. And then, of course, middle housing, that's why we're here, right? So the housing choices for complete community, again, we'll get into that later, but that was also a big piece that I think it did well. I think people in this room know it was not as advanced or as innovative as we would have liked, but it got across the finish line. And I think sometimes just getting your foot in the door is a win too. And so that's something that I would hope to see expanded as well, but that's also something that the town really needed, and I'm really happy that they passed that this spring.
Congrats. We've come a long way in the last couple years from all the stuff you guys just talked about, from where we were, no ADUs, 24-month reviews for apartments and things in Chapel Hill. But we're not, we're never done, I think, with advocacy work, with zoning reform work. I think a lot of folks in the community maybe wish we were. But the reality is, I think every project, you find something new in the rules that could be better. And Mitch, you said earlier something about right rules, right places, and looking at the objective and changing the rules to match the objective. So I'm curious to hear from all of you guys, what are the next most impactful zoning reforms? What changes would help us to continue to work on this housing affordability? We're a desirable place. We're going to continue to have housing affordability problems as long as the market is good and people are getting paid and want to move here. Those are all good things. We don't want to stop. So what's the next most impactful zoning reform on your mind?
Well, I heard Mitch mention something the other day, which was no zoning. Why don't you answer?
Here comes the bus.
I got to be careful about saying that in public. No, there are places, and I think some urbanists are designated areas where there's just no zoning, and let innovation take its course, and so that is something that was discussed. I don't know if it's going to go through, but Jim and I were just talking about this, and I wish he could respond to this, but this whole thing about tiny homes is a project now in Austin where they're having tiny homes, just a place to sleep with common bathrooms. If we have an affordable housing crisis, is everything truly on the table? And so now it went from 500 units now to 1,000 units. And so looking and exploring, it's not in a city, it's in a county jurisdiction where zoning is not as stringent. But if we're in a housing crisis, can we truly be innovative? And so I'm looking, whether it's different zoning or no zoning in a specific area, to meet this pressing need. Sometimes we're so fixated on rules, and that's why I'm saying I'm not a fan of rules, because in some cases, I don't know the origin of it. It's difficult to be flexible and change it. But if we're truly in a housing crisis, let's look at the next thing, and something that Jim and I are, now exploring. I heard colleagues of mine doing what was truly called RV urbanism, where they just have an RV in a park where they can have their unit. In most places, that's illegal. And so I just think the next iteration should start to relax, be innovative, have these innovating zoning districts that are a little more creative and relaxed in a defined area. Hasn't been proposed yet, but it's just a dream that I have.
You just proposed it.
I just proposed it. And no height limits in Raleigh anymore.
A change that I would make, I often see affordable housing density bonus as a term. We've had that in Durham for 30 years, I guess, a long time. To my knowledge, Nobody's ever actually used it. In fact, I actually used it once, but it hadn't been implemented yet. But the implication is that we don't want density. If you do something we want, we'll make an exception. I would make the base density 100 units to the acre and require you to get special permits to do less than that. I literally probably would do that. About zoning, I have very mixed feelings. Our codes in Durham are now, you add them all up, all the handbooks and other related documents, over 3,000 pages. And to go from 16 to 3,000 pages is pretty astonishing. On the other hand, I've been in situations where having a good plan that's very detailed actually has a positive effect. When we did Winmore over in, it was actually in Carborough's jurisdiction, or city limits of Carrborough, we had the University Endowment as our financial backer, and then the head man was fired and they backed out, and we had to sell the project to Eric Chupp's company, Scott Coben's, because we no longer had financing. But we had written very detailed requirements, and they followed them. And so, we get a lot of credit for how that came, but our real implementation was all on paper. So a good plan is a very good thing. It's not always bad to have good detailed plans. On the other hand, if you wrote your plan from the standpoint of trying to prevent bad people from doing bad things, you're going to have the opposite effect.
I said no high limits in Raleigh. It was for high rises. I don't want to freak everybody out. So not like just single family. So for high rises, no height limits.
Sorry, what was the question again?
What zoning?
What zoning
other
reforms?
zoning reforms do we need?
So I think we talked about this too in preparation for the panel, talking about intent. I think the piece that really needs to be looked at is impact as well. There's been a lot of performative zoning reform around, getting rid of single family. It's very much, I think the intent is there, but is it actually producing what's needed? Is it making the impact that's actually going to make a difference in the way that we're creating place and creating places for everyone? So I would say the zoning reform that I'm most interested in is looking at moving the needle and doing something that is going to make the change and produce the outcome that we're all looking for.
I think there's a lot that is obvious to some people in the community that we need more houses, so we should build more houses. And that is an easy answer to a much more difficult, nuanced question. And so everyone up here, in addition to kind of their 9-to-5 work, building or planning things, is also advocating. And in that advocacy work, I know myself and a ton of people in this room, I'm sure the electeds, have gotten feedback, pushback, screamed at, shouted behind about how we can't change things. We can't change things this quickly. And some of that is from fear that is legitimate, and some of it's from fear that's not legitimate. And listening is an important skill in doing that work, right? But I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got here. Like, these reforms are fixing past mistakes. You started to touch on that at the end of your talk, Mitch. Because I think some of the critiques that we get when making zoning reform is, do we want to repeat past planning mistakes? The APA has come out and apologized for their creation of, racially segregative zoning in the beginning, and that's been a big step. But fixing it isn't just an apology. And so how do we, as practitioners or as advocates, how do you work and make sure that the things you're advocating for today in zoning reform are not a 21st century repeat of redlining or urban renewal? Like, how do we reconcile that? We told you guys we were getting deep today. Who wants to start?
I talked a little about it in my conversation, and because there's so much development pressure, it is now going into neighborhoods. It's now going into vulnerable populations. very often historically disadvantaged communities. And I agree, we did have a public apology, but to me, addressing past harm has three parts to it. It's acknowledge, apologize, and then atone. People get one or two right, but the atone is the hardest part. As I said earlier, I get very frustrated when every time a project comes around, whether it's a text change, you come into this combat, it's like a repeat. It's one-off conversation, a debate, and I believe we need to take a step back, identify vulnerable areas, places that are threatened for potential development, and start coming up with citywide policies to protect them. I'm now working on a project in Texas. There's a black community right next to downtown. We're having conversations for them. They're saying no to every zoning case because they're concerned that downtown mixed-use development is going to increase their taxes. In Texas, they do a reevaluation every 2 years. Taxes go up every 2 years. And so if they can be held harmless from any property tax increases, they'll say yes, so they know that they can stay and thrive and live there and sell their home at their own time. So to me, I think being more proactive versus reactive for every text change, every zoning case, to me is the way to go. Otherwise, we'll continue having these combats, zoning case by zoning case, project by project, text change by text change, and that's where I'd like us to go. We know the areas from the future land use map, we know the areas that are vulnerable, and make sure we don't just address past harm, but don't create any new harm.
My recommendation would be for all of us to get to know our neighbors and broaden it to members of our community and know people by their first names. People are motivated by fear and fear of change. And the entire NIMBY, not in my backyard effect, is really sort of funny when you watch it. We had, near where I live off Cornwallis Road in Durham, Pulte wanted to build a townhouse development, and the next door neighborhood erupted. We've got to stop this. It can't happen. Well, Pulte's plan had a 40% tree shave. It was voted down, and the very next day they sent in crews and they clear-cut the entire site. They cut every tree on the entire site and built what was allowed by the existing zoning. Then somebody wanted to build an apartment building on the corner. The people in the new neighborhood came out in force against the apartment building. People are afraid of change. And so if we can get to know our fellow citizens by first name and not be afraid of them, we can have a very welcoming experience. The most integrated neighborhood I know about in America is over in Greensboro called Southside, which is a DPC, Duane Plater-Zybert planned redevelopment commission sponsored project, and it is definitely 50-50 racially. It's got people of all different incomes. It's got lots of ADUs. It's got townhouses, apartments. They built buildings in the middle of parking lot. They did crazy things, but if you haven't visited it, it's well worth going over and just saying, how did they pull this off? And they restored a lot of historic houses in the neighborhood also. It's in the old Ashboro neighborhood. And I would recommend going to Southside, walking around and say, how did this happen? Let's see if we can do that here.
So one thing I think to continue the thread around communication is learning how we actually talk about things. I think, the protecting of neighborhoods or neighborhood conservation, a lot of these words are becoming weaponized, and basically it's saying no. And I think if we unpack that and understand what we're actually wanting and switch it around to say a more positive statement about what we want, I think we'd actually get a lot further. If you go to any type of community meeting, you're going to hear people say what they don't want, and they don't want any change. But I think when you ask them what they do want, a lot of what's already being proposed is in there. It's a knee-jerk reaction. And it's becoming, you know, like Mitch had said too, if you're saying no to something, you're saying yes to something else. So being a good neighbor and learning what people are saying or wanting, I think is a piece of it. But in our planning language, you know, understanding why a neighborhood conservation district is there, and then actually talking about that is going to be more impactful than saying we're just conserving. Community character, what does that even mean? I mean, I think unpacking that and actually knowing what that means is going to basically highlight what you're trying to accomplish. And then protection, that's very defensive. It's almost militaristic when you think about it. What are we really protecting from? Why aren't we actually promoting or encouraging something else? So I think just the flip of the switch to being less defensible and having more positive language would actually make a big impact in trying to move the needle as well.
Yeah, those are all good points, I think, about like part of the atonement you were talking about, Mitch, is also as like practitioners to go back into the block party and be that weird person that y'all all know I am that talks about zoning at the block party. But while you're eating barbecue, while you're talking about your kids, while you're comparing schools, right, all of those things are connected to what we're talking about. And part of that is, you know, what you're saying is changing the language on how we talk about our neighborhoods and what we want them to be starts in knowing the first name of your neighbor and walking by on the porch. Those are sort of Congress of New Urbanism ideals, is to be able to sit on your porch and talk to someone, but they actually work too in getting things done. You know, that was a tough question, and I think, you know, great answers, of course, but it sounds like we need more than just zoning reform to fix where we're at in housing affordability. And I wonder if you guys can each share your perspective on other changes outside of zoning, other policies that are critical to getting more housing, getting more affordable housing built in our region. Bob, you want to start?
Sorry. It's pretty easy. It's all math. Nothing but math. Lower land costs, long-term financing, low interest rates, and in many cases, nonprofit sponsorship, which doesn't necessarily appeal to everybody in this room. But if you put all those things together, you can cut rents in half. I can show it to you all day long. Lumber is down to $502 today in the futures market. It was up to nearly 2,000 18 months ago or 20 months ago. What's driving up the price of housing is lack of supply. There's no other reason. Price is whatever the market will bear, and when a product is not available and it's necessary, the market will pay more. Now, lower interest rates made it possible to pay way more because people mostly only look at the monthly payment. And when interest was 3% or 2%, it was a lot lower. But if we make it easier to build more housing, we will really, really help solve the problem. You know, my partner, Aaron Lubeck, and I went up and did an exploratory trip on the West Coast, and we got all the way up to Vancouver. And we stayed in a Airbnb room inside a house, and we found out that the owner had 7 units. He had 3 units in the ADU, he had 3 units in the house, and one more that they lived in. And I said, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "Because we have to. People need a place to live." And there's such a shortage there that this was a solution.
I agree with a lot of points that Bob said. I believe every option should be placed on the table. Colleen made a very good point. If you want to build more affordable housing, you've got to relax the rules, because if you want to incentivize, it's both rules and time in order to get the product out there, as well as where it could be built, what size of it. One observation while I was in grad school that I had realized, which really catapulted or escalated the affordable housing problem, was in the 1980s, HUD was decimated. The federal government used to provide public housing, not that it was the greatest type of housing, but public housing, because housing is a human right. And they transitioned to block grants and vouchers. And homelessness started to spike. The housing crisis, affordability started to spike. So I believe one of the solutions, because I remember Hope 6, what a great federal project by Jack Kemp, a Republican, who came up with it. But since then, it's just been at the margin. I certainly believe that the federal government should get back into the public housing business, but a very different type than the projects we've seen of old. I think right now the pressure is far too much on local government and the private sector and developers, and we need partners from the federal government to start providing quality, affordable housing of all ages, from seniors to young families, and to me that will start to lessen the burden in addition to everything else we've heard. So that is always a hope and wish. Will it happen? Probably not. So we'll continue to have this problem because I said earlier, desirable markets, desirable regions will always have an affordable housing problem. We need to back out, relax regulations, let innovation take its course to find new ways of providing this housing that people just have made illegal today.
Can I add something? You might have seen in the paper yesterday that the Biden administration announced the YIMBY Act, Yes in My Backyard, $85 million at HUD, grants to cities that will remove barriers to the creation. Durham would be first in line for that if we pass the SCAD. And it's all about zoning barriers, making it very difficult to build more affordably.
It's going to take strong leadership. I think, given that there's a lot of elected officials in here, it's going to be a tough job. I think you're going to be going against the popular vote in a lot of instances, and you're going to have to keep the public interest in mind and keep the people who are maybe not in the room or not the loudest voices in your head as you're making your decisions. And that's hard. I think from a staff perspective too, having been in those shoes, it takes strong leadership there as well, bringing the ideas to the table. That's something too that is not always common in a lot of municipalities where staff are the ones that are driving the conversation, but I think that's also needed to be able to share all the tools and put all the tools on the table to make sure that the decision makers have good choices in front of them. But there's a lot of hand-wringing around this conversation, and it is tough. It is a difficult conversation, but the strong leadership is going to be the one that passes the legislation that's needed to get the project done.
So we have a few more questions before we turn it over to you guys. And I'm wondering if each of the panelists, Mitch got to share some stories about doing this work and how that went and was successful in the past in Raleigh. I'm wondering if Bob and Colleen want to do a little storytelling about their experience in implementing these things locally. I know a lot of folks in the room have been part of those conversations, but is there stories you want to share about successes or pushback and maybe delay or failures that have happened along the way? What are some challenges to doing this work?
I'll go back to Wynmoor. Carrboro has a small house requirement, and so there are 60 or 80 houses in Wynmoor of 1,100 square feet or smaller. Also, we made the decision to make available in the very heart of the project property for a tax credit project. I think it's the only place in North Carolina where you have low-income housing tax credit residents living next to $750,000 houses. And one of the best things that ever happened to me, a friend of mine moved over to Wynmoor, and I said, what do you think about living right next door to people in a tax credit project, or a low-income housing project? And he said, Bob, we call them neighbors, which made me
So one thing that I found interesting coming from DC, I was in DC for 15 years before I came down to Chapel Hill, was that housing was a way to advance a lot of other policy. And I led their comprehensive plan update, and part of that was working with the mayor and her administration to understand what the transition plan was for her second term. And housing was a priority, and trying to get thousands of units done by a certain time period. So we did a housing framework, and it was for equitable growth. And it was one of the first plans in the country to put neighborhood targets in place. So we knew by neighborhood how many units were needed. And that was something that was helpful to push back in the neighborhoods that said, we don't need this. They needed to have their fair share. It was also helpful in the neighborhoods that did have a lot of affordable housing and needed more market rate housing, so they could have the economic development that they needed and create the places that they were all desperate to have. So when I came to Chapel Hill and we looked at housing choice for a complete community, it was something that I think the council was interested in pursuing, and it became a unifying element, housing. It was a new administration, there was a different council, and they were interested in doing things differently. And that was very intriguing as a planning staff, because it gave us some opportunity to flex our muscles a little bit and show them that we did have ideas and they were open to them. And so they had this whole new initiative called Complete Communities, and they were looking at Chapel Hill from a complete perspective. Whereas before, they took the single-family residential areas off the table and they said, you're okay, we're not gonna do anything here. And they put all the growth in the nodes and the corridors, which from a planning perspective, 20, 30, 40 years ago, that makes sense. But today, that does not make sense. That's not equitable, that's not fair. Everyone is going to experience change to lift up the public interest, right? Yeah. So we looked at Chapel Hill from a complete perspective, and we tried to understand what is going to be needed from a community and what is going to be needed from an economic development perspective. And we knew we couldn't put targets in different neighborhoods because we needed a target from a community-wide, town-wide perspective. But we also understood we needed to understand where is this going to go. So we did the land use capacity study. We did the technical analyses to underpin everything. And that helped a lot. But I think the most important message that was conveyed was the town became unified around this new vision. And if you look at it, it's not different than what was already in the comp plan. It was a rebranding. And if you look at the goals and the priorities that were in the comp plan and the goals and priorities that were in the Complete Community Initiative, they're very similar. But I think having the momentum and having the revisitation of the conversation and talking through it in a different way was very unifying to facilitate the conversation, how we're gonna grow differently, and how we have different expectations now for ourselves so that everyone is welcome. And so that's why we seized the zeitgeist and we said everything's complete community is everything. And so we said housing choices for complete community, greenways, we're gonna have greenway oriented development. We're gonna flip the switch on, how we look through development projects with a different lens. Does it meet all the criteria? It really did help change some of the cultural needs from the town perspective and how the town functioned and how we started to interact with one another as well. So I think looking at, the leadership piece is important and how we communicate is important, but then just like riding that wave and taking advantage of it to get the policy needed. And housing really was the unifying perspective in that example.
So let me just make a quick point before you get to the next question. Colleen, that is such a critical point. Very often, with the age of social media, our elected officials are in a very tough position. They want to make the right decision, but very often they get the pressure that they cannot. And I think we have to be allies, we have to support them, we have to back them up, we have to show up to let them know that it's not just about the self-interest, it's about the public interest. So they're in a tough position. I would never want to be elected official. I know I'd probably last only one term because I would vote my conscience, not what the group that is showing up at the public meeting would say. But they're in a tough position. They're trying to balance what constituents are saying, but also recognizing there's a broader public interest. So I'm very pleased. It's a great story about what happened in Chapel Hill, having the conversation. But we do have to really give credit and support our elected officials because they're in a very, very tough position. In the age of social media, it is a different, the public square is now digital and it's changed. And so I just think that, I just want to put it out there, but just to say that is a great point.
I'm getting my time alert up here. I think if you'd asked me 5 years ago, would Chapel Hill successfully pass missing middle reform, I think I would have fallen out of my chair laughing. Sorry, but it's not. I don't think it was on anyone's bingo card, right? And I think that what you're talking about, the leadership and the advocacy and the coming together, is what made it happen. So since I got my time card, I'm going to combine my last two questions because they're very similar, and say. We've got a room full of people who know where there's broken places in the code, who know where there's community feedback, who, staff who can have that leadership, community members and elected officials. So what should they do with that knowledge? And you can speak generally about what the people in the audience can do, not just the people up here in the front of the room, but also maybe speak to what the very next thing where we need them to show up and be at the front of the room speaking might be in terms of your local radar. And I'll just start really quickly. And I'll say, Evan mentioned I'm the vice chair of the Raleigh Transit Authority. So this is my opinion, not the Transit Authority's opinion. But we have a really contentious discussion in Raleigh right now about the land use around our bus rapid transit corridors. And it needs nuanced, thoughtful input and feedback to get it right. There is a way to do it wrong. I don't think that's the way we're taking. But we also need people to come and stand up for that. And if we get BRT right in Raleigh, we just found out federal funding for every other transit project in the Triangle needs us to get it right in Raleigh. So even if you're not in Raleigh, we'd appreciate your voice on that. There's always something you can show up for, but that's mine. Who wants to go next? Bob, you want to go first again?
A little bit off topic, but real quickly, a great thing that could be done by our local cities is use land that they have. Durham County and city have 1,200 or 1,600 fallow acres, a lot of parking lots. There are a lot more parking lots that could be redeveloped. And they could rather, we just gave away $90 million to help developers of, anyway, I don't want to even talk about it. That shouldn't have been given away. It should have been a payback fund at low interest, which could have been a rotary fund that would have continued to produce more and more housing, much of which could be on land that is otherwise underutilized, that's owned by the municipality and the county.
Do you want to talk about SCAD before you get the microphone?
Oh, and please, on the 21st of August, it would be wonderful if you'd come to the city council. Some of the council people are very strong supporters and they need backup. And there are others who have decided that this is the reason that they can point out that they're defending our municipality against evil developers, which is totally wrong. This is to help. This is to make it possible for us to actually build more affordable housing.
I mentioned this. Usually, staff does a staff report, and I would be encouraged if we start including the ROI analysis in every staff report. So if you're going to deny a case, be very clear about what amount of tax base you're giving away. There are many other considerations, but that should also be part of the conversation, because as you do that, you're putting more of the burden on single family and other property owners for taxes. So I think an ROI should be part of the conversation. So when you do say no, and here's a tall high-rise building that you're saying no to 10 stories, you're taking that tax base and throwing it away. I think the public should be aware that that should be part of the decision-making process, among other considerations for traffic and stormwater, et cetera, and trees. But to me, I think that would help the conversation to know that when you're saying no, let's truly talk about the implications.
So I think for what's on the horizon for Chapel Hill, I know everyone has heard this for almost a decade, maybe longer, but the ordinance rewrite is real and it's happening. It was kicked off officially, the final phase of it. And that will be, that'll be a slog, to be honest. So I think just staying in tune with that and making sure that, you know, the voices that aren't always heard or the most popular are organized and that there's an honest discussion around what's being traded off. I think, you know, again, talking about impact versus intent, that's going to be an important part of that conversation. And, you know, it will be long, but I think that it is going to hopefully make a lot of the changes that other cities in the region are already doing, and hopefully that it becomes more aligned with the values. But I would say keep in tune with those conversations and lend your voice to that, because the work that you're doing is important, and the work that you're doing is going to be necessary to help make Chapel Hill align with its values.
Well, can you guys give a hand for the panelists right now? Then we're going to move through your questions. So we do have slated some time to answer audience questions. As Evan mentioned, this was a really fruitful part of the last summit. And Evan's going to run the mic because I'm 6 months pregnant.
Thank you again, panelists. And I'll just add another little point about that last question. You know, support the HBA because this event was brought to you by the Home Builders Association. I think home builders now have a unique position in the market where the status quo isn't going to be the future of the home building industry. We can't just continue to steamroll greenfield sites. I mean, we can, but we really shouldn't. So I think it's great that the Home Builders Association is now a thought leader, a conversation leader. So that's another avenue that we're exploring here. Question.
Tell us who you are. My name is Karen Howard. I'm chair of the Chatham County Board of Commissioners, and I want to thank the panel. But I do want to raise Chatham County as a county is distinct from the municipalities and towns that we've talked about, and ask for input on what we should be looking at or should be watching out for as we go from being a fairly rural community to developing some real urbanity in pockets. We're redoing our Unified Development Ordinance. We have small area plans being produced, but we have a real affordability crisis in Chatham. With, I think, the average home price, median home price, I think it was $655,000 last October. Yeah, so I would love to hear what, like, some really high-level top things that we should be looking out for or preparing for now.
I alluded to in my presentation, but aside from having these official town hall meetings, start having community conversations where you're able in smaller groups to really dive into it so you start to hear some of the fears. You know, I remember when we did our LA Comp Plan, we spent a year before we even started the process having conversations to start to address some of the fears, but also some of the problems, so it's put it in context. So it's a collective conversation, you work through it. So I would start with those conversations, so crucial. If you don't do it, they start to come out of public meetings, it starts to become very divisive. People's worst fears start to surface. So if you start with having conversations, here is, not start with a vision of what you like to see. What problem are we collectively trying to solve? And you work that out together as a community in small settings. So then as it starts to grow, people are more knowledgeable, they're on board. I think the Chapel Hill experience is a good one to learn from, but that's, to me, is where I would start, and bring in some outside experts. Sometimes locals, we get a little respect, you bring in an outside expert. Even so, we said the very same thing. They said, ooh, look how smart they are. So just, if it's helpful, we had a lecture series, and it really helped us move forward because everything we shared in these lecture series and these conversations ended up in our plan and ended up in our code. And our plan, when adopted, got 96% fully support or supported the plan, which was unheard of, but we did the homework in advance. Even though there are opposing points of view, we let every point of view be discussed at the table so we can move forward as a community.
I would have a design charrette with VinFast very quickly focused on how it will be possible for their workforce to walk to work or bike to work or have a very short ride to work, and bring in some real creative thinkers and national experts to think about if they're doing an electric car and it has environmental pluses, we don't want to have a lot of environmental negatives of people having to commute long distances.
I can, but go ahead. So I would just say, I think when there's a lot of change happening in a community, particularly like Chatham County, I'm a resident of Chatham County, I know what's going on, but I would say it's important to explain to the community what's happening and what isn't, because a lot of misinformation happens. Word of mouth and the game of telephone is real. And so I think when you're embarking on a conversation like this, it's important to say what you're doing and what you're not doing, and then what's up for discussion. And I think having that consistently throughout your process is helpful to reiterate to people, this is what we're doing, this is what we're not doing. If you're here for what we're not doing, like, see ya. But this is what we don't really know about and we need to have a conversation around.
And I'll just briefly add, I'm an urbanist because I am from rural North Carolina. And I think the rural county voices are massively important in the cities. To say, if you actually care about green space, if you actually care about preserving our farms and where your food comes from and our way of life, then you have to put the housing in the city limits. And that's not always a popular thing to say, and it's not always an easy thing to say, but I think county staff and county electeds, I'm from Madison County for reference, it's Highway 26 between Asheville and Johnson City is bringing all that development pressure, goes right through my great uncle's old cattle farm, the highway does. So like, we have that same thing back home, and that's why I live in Raleigh, and that's why I fight for Raleigh to be dense. Southern Wake County's exploding with 540 in the same way Chatham County is, but when we're at City Hall, we think about the nature we're preserving being our single-family backyard half-acre lot. We don't think about it being the hundreds of thousands of trees they're cutting down for 540, right? And so having the county folks come and actually say that in the big city is really important. Great question. We had some in the back over there.
My name is Donna Crowder. I work for Four Star. We're a land development company. We're a sister company to D.R. Horton, and we're very interested in affordable housing. And of course, the density thing is a huge problem, but the other problem that we're facing today, we talk about increasing density, but what I didn't hear you talk about was the infrastructure that's going to have to happen when you have this population growth. You've got the stress on the road systems, the transit system, and I live in Garner, and I really want that transit system to go in. But also this water and sewer supply. I mean, sewer has been a crisis, obviously, in Johnston County, and they're addressing it now, but that's going to be a problem. So I'm just wondering if in the planning stages consider that kind of thing,
absolutely.
and how do you go about resolving that?
Thank you for that question. And I will say I went to a transportation charrette last week, and mixed use units, whether it's retail, office, residential, that has the lowest impact per resident, at least on car infrastructure. So that's one part of the answer is we have to implement that mixed use piece.
Yeah, I'll let Mitch take this one.
Yeah. The answer is that is done. In the planning stages, now I used to get frustrated when we were planning out where growth would occur, and then there'd be this satellite annexation, utility is extended, and now all the growth is happening in a place that we were not planning for. So when I mentioned Blueprint for Growth, you would do anticipate that. You know the size of the pipes. You work very closely with utility companies. There are deals you make about extending utilities, how you reimburse over time, but we never let the tail wag the dog. We want to make sure we provide housing for people. I no longer like the word density because it's a scary word. It's housing for people, whether it's for rent or for sale, but all those things can be planned for. You just have to coordinate it with your utility company about what growth you expect. That's why that blueprint is so important. You know what capacity you need over time versus we don't know, and so it can be planned. In terms of roadways, that is something where it's short-term pain for long-term gain. Once it's developed, people kind of adjust to traffic patterns, but I'm from other markets, you're from DC, I'm from New York. I love driving in this region. Waiting one phase for a traffic light is not traffic. I think we've got spoiled, but if car is going to be predominant part of the way we live, I tell people, you know, you're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic. So it's something we just have to learn that it's a short-term gain, short-term pain for long-term gain. All the infrastructure can be addressed, but that tends to be a reaction pump. Some people will say, you can't build this, we don't have water capacity, sewer capacity, road capacity. To me, I have to find out, is that a reason or an excuse that you want to deny it? But to me, we have to provide places for people, and we can figure the rest out.
Other questions? Megan?
Oh, there's one. Okay.
All right, we're keeping track. Wait for the microphone, please.
Oh, yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Patton, Raleigh City Council. I'm sorry to jump the line. That's not real, elected officials jumping the line. But I did want to offer two lived experiences, which are both mine, and then I'll get and then put the question after it. So first, you know, be fully transparent about where my family sits on the income spectrum. We were shopping for a home in the $200,000 range. We were competing with people who probably could afford $400,000 homes. They were outbidding us significantly. And I understand that that's the lived experience that funnels a lot of the conversations that happen in rooms like this. The place we were coming from was actually right here in Chapel Hill. We lived in Glen Lennox. It had been acquired, and we were in one of so anyway, we had mold issues, leakage issues. We had roach infestation. I was raising my infant daughter in this home that was just not suitable. From the outside, I mean, it's beautiful. Glen Lennox was a dream, right? These little cottage courts, the pocket park in the middle. What a delight, but also like just dilapidated and not suitable for us to raise a family. And in addition to that, our rents were raised and we were forced out. And so those were both my lived experiences with asterisk all the privilege that I brought to those situations as a college-educated, married, cis, white lady. And so I guess the question I have at the end of that is the strategies that you've seen that have been effective. I would love to hear more about this, like hold harmless for tax increases, like the things that can create stress and trouble and inhumanity for the people who are in places trying to be those people living in places. Like what strategies work for them? You know, how can we sustain? Yeah, how do we keep those people there and healthy?
Yeah. It is new thinking that is underway. The gentrification without displacement, the Atlanta Beltline, they're exploring an equity fund, which is a fund that's created to offset or to hold people harmless. Evanston, through their kind of reparations commission are coming up with a housing grant of $25,000. So they're now being explored. What I share with you in Texas is something they're considering. But the concept of holding harmless and not doing any future harm is a new conversation that's starting because people are being more vocal about past harm and unjust practices. And now these are vulnerable places because you see development occurring. The demand, because people are saying no to more dense project, that demand is now being pushed out into lower density neighborhoods because there's nowhere else to go. The concept is let's get ahead of it. Let's be proactive and not reactive, because what happens is, and as you probably know, you're a council member, in zoning cases, the gentrification displacement question comes up, zoning case after zoning case after zoning case, if there's a vulnerable area, and that is a case-by-case reactive mode. We need to get ahead of it, explore some of the techniques that are happening. Like I said, Atlanta, other places are exploring ways of offsetting or creating places of no harm so that those that live there can stay there without feeling the pressure of increased taxes, increased land values, or development pressure. So it's emerging. And since we can get together and I could show you some examples of what's being explored, but right now it's something that's new.
A crazy idea that I've been trying to figure out is tenancy rights, giving tenants actually a monetary value for the fact that they occupy a place that is on the verge of gentrification. Southeast Atlanta would be a great, and I spent a lot of time down there. I'd also point out Southern Village has one ADU, and the reason for that was it would have been a unit count. It was called a unit. It's not a unit in Durham, so you don't use up density. So make it easier to do that, and also, because the impact is so low, also figure out a way like Seattle did, where you have a book of pre-approved plans which require no effort to get approved, and then add to that low-interest financing so that people can actually get them built. And that form of densification is wonderful. I probably would add a bias toward projects that would include alleys, because alleys really make the ADUs much, much more feasible and desirable.
So I would say too, there's part of it where it's programming. Some of it isn't land use based, so it's just programming. But another part is being proactive, building in the techniques as part of the entitlement. So build first, if that's physical displacement. I think that what we're seeing more in the work that I'm doing is cultural and social displacement as well. And that is a lot harder sometimes to be proactive. So that gets into knowing your community members and knowing what they're experiencing, and then trying to have programs to help with that. And it's a bit more nuanced than the physical piece, but it is just as important, because sometimes that's an indicator of physical displacement to come. And so thinking ahead, that's sort of that first gap, is that social and economic and cultural displacement, and then it gets to the physical.
And we had at the back of the room.
Good morning. My name is J.L. Wagner. I'm with CUNY. And I want to take advantage of the varied voices that are on the panel, both with your regional background as well as your professional background. And one of the things that we have talked about today, and I've heard it from every single one of you, is learn from your neighbor. So taking advantage of your regional background, what is it that we can learn from different regions across the nation that you have taken part in, and say, okay, we don't want that to come here. What is the number one thing that you all can contribute to some of our elected officials that can take this back and really resonate on? We don't want the RV parks to happen along the side of the road like they're happening in Florida. There's been a really big crisis in Florida for housing, with a financial disparity for the last 2 decades. And if we don't change what we're doing here today, that is what is going to come. We're seeing it happen in Asheville areas. We will see it in the Raleigh-Durham area. So what is the number one thing that each of you can say, we need you guys to think about this and affect change so the developers can buy in and be a part of that construct that will improve the next 30 years for our next generations?
Thank you. While I'm walking, I'll add incentivize citizen builders.
I mean, I said it in I know it was kind of plain, but the one thing I would say is understand the implications of saying no. I mean, I can't underscore how serious that is, and understand those implications, because if you keep saying no, and I'm not saying you have to say yes to everything, but be very thoughtful about what's saying no, the demand is not going away. Just like water is going to find where it's going to go. If you say no, water says, I don't care, I'm going here anyway. To understand, lean into your planning staff, Blueprint for Growth, make sure is co-created between the city and the local government and the stakeholders, and start to answer some of those tough questions, because if you keep saying no, then the unfortunate things are going to start to pop up. Things that you really don't want to see, that is within zoning, because people are trying to find a way of getting a project approved. You mentioned that several times, Bob. So that's the one takeaway, is really be very thoughtful, because too often we're reacting to neighborhood voices that are screaming, and we just want to be able to address that constituency. But to me, understanding those implications, these are super hard decisions. As we suggested, have those community conversations so that the public understands the implications of saying no, so that you can solve that problem together. Because if you don't, people will still, the demand is coming, they'll find ways of living, because people need to exist. So that's the one thing that I would share with you, that we have to really truly understand those implications and be very careful when we use the word no or denial.
Let me add to that, Mitch. I think to your question about comparable cities, and Mitch's answer about what are you saying no to, I think being really honest when people say, we don't want to be San Francisco, we don't want to be Brooklyn gentrifying, right? We don't want to be those places, is that those places are how you don't want them to be because they said no, not because they said yes. And I think repeating that over and over and over again, San Francisco is how it is because they have spent 50 years saying no to allowing people to live next door. And we cannot do that. We have the privilege of being forward in time from them, right? And I think that's the most critical thing, is to be honest whenever someone compares another city, to say, we can make different choices than that. We are making different choices than that. Like when Raleigh got rid of parking minimums, we were the 3rd largest city in the country to do it. We were ahead of the game. We were the first city to do maximums. Right? We set the standard that other people are doing for the last year and this next year. So we can do differently to avoid those comparisons.
I would go out and look for places that are not walkable and figure out why they aren't walkable. What are the barriers to walkability? A good example, Virginia, VDOT controls all the streets in every municipality, and they're all too wide. The curbs are wrong for urban places. Florida, the same thing. It's all about the car. And unfortunately, Durham just adopted the NCDOT street standards, which is totally wrong for a municipality. They're too wide, cars go too fast, they're dangerous for pedestrians. So look at places that are walkable and places that aren't walkable, and figure out how do we remove barriers to walkability.
To be consistent with my earlier message, I would say choose what you want to be. I think if you look at cities and say we don't want to be that, look at cities that say we do want to be that, and take their lessons learned and ask them, how did you do that? And what were the struggles and what was the pushback and how did you get around that? Because every city has had pushback and every city has had someone say no, every county too. But I think the ones that have gotten things the way they want it to be are the ones that have figured out how to say yes, or yes and instead of no. And that's really the difference. It sounds easier than it is, but that's been my experience. I worked in Alexandria, Virginia before DC, and they don't have VDOT standards. That's where, yeah, it's old enough. And that's where CNU, I think, was signed. It's very common to go out as a planner and see people measuring the sidewalks and measuring, the roads, because they figured out a way to say no to the fire department. Or they figured out a way to say, yeah, you can go as fast as you want down our streets, but you're going to do it in a really little fire truck.
Well, Orinoco Street in Alexandria, two-way traffic, parking on both sides, 16 feet wide. Yep. How does that work? Well, it's worked for 250 years.
It works. So I would say, find the place that you like, or find the place you want to be, and ask them, how did you do it? And then adopt that.
Other questions?
Yeah. I've got one more question here.
Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Chapel Hill. I'm Camille Berry, Town Council member. I am a renter, and I think that renters don't get the respect that we deserve. And one of the ways that we can is that you invite us to the table. I was invited to the table because I was involved in the community. I've worked with several of you before I held this position. So look to the people that you are serving, not just with the homes that you're building for purchase, but also those homes that you are looking to provide for rent. And see how we're involved in the community, and invite us to go before the elected bodies to talk about what they want. So this really isn't a question, it is a comment of how can you activate a really strong group. I just looked, there was a story in the Times, late July, I'm scrolling, July 21st of this year, about the increasing number of renters who are elected officials. And we are using our voices. Today, there are 2 renters on the Town of Chapel Hill Council. One is not seeking re-election. And I don't know, I do think that there are a couple who are renters candidates. But I encourage you to reach out to those of us who rent. And we're your neighbors. We are your colleagues. We are the people that you're serving.
Thank you. I just want to make a point, because very often we have this pushback from renters, not for people against renters. And I had to tell them, because a lot of people say, well, they don't pay the property tax. Actually, they do. They do through their rent. So they're contributing to the overall tax. Damn it. Excuse me? We don't itemize it.
The apartment in Durham is paying $260 a month for rent. I mean, tax, excuse me.
So this will probably be more comment than question, but so I'm John Showalter with Halls by Dickerson. We're based out of Raleigh. So Colleen, I wanted to just hit on your point about sometimes the policymakers get it right. It's the staff that gets it wrong. So we've been part of 2 projects inside the city of Durham, that the staff has come out on inspections and disapproved our plan, disapproved what we put in, even though we put it in per the approved plans that came out of planning. That is incredibly frustrating. It slows us down, it costs us money, and mortgage rates or interest rates don't just affect the people buying the houses, they affect the people that have the A&D loan. So your process timing is important, but also having inspections undercut zoning or planning is completely detrimental to the process, and it's a problem. Being part of Missing Middle, we've got, this is a Raleigh project, so a little bit, but I probably think it affects. We got to get appraisers and bankers on board to support Missing Middle projects. I don't know how we do that. But some of the other problems that we're facing with a Missing Middle project is it's an infill piece. The stormwater implications make the Missing Middle problematic, not only from the development standpoint, but what we then have to charge the individuals for their HOA fees to maintain stormwater. When you got a Missing Middle cottage court that's got 9 units but has a humongous stormwater pond, it's impractical. Also, the challenge is, how do we tap into the City of Raleigh sewer department? I got to negotiate a sewer easement. I got to negotiate stormwater easements with people that don't want it. It becomes impractical. It becomes hard. It becomes not cost effective. So those are some challenges that the Missing Middle looks great on paper, but it's incredibly hard to implement. And I think cities in particular have to think about that stormwater piece. Again, not only for the cost of the developer, but the cost for the people that are going to live there and have to maintain it. And then finally, I think there's a lot of us that have a lot of good ideas, but we don't have the opportunity to have these forums. So I appreciate Durham doing this, or HBA DOC doing this. But City of Raleigh, last I checked, is operating at 60% capacity in their planning department. Chatham County has about 3 or 4 inspections departments, positions open in their inspection department. municipalities, we have to find a way to get these positions funded and get people back in there to working in these departments. And a work from home doesn't really work too well when you need to get answers from somebody who only is answering their cell phone from home and can't walk down the hall to get, maybe they don't know the answer from stormwater, but being able to walk down the hall and get that answer. We don't have quarterbacks inside of these municipalities anymore. We don't have people that you can call up and say, I want to understand what to do. I just need somebody to point me in the right direction. And then when you get inconsistent results from inside the municipalities, it becomes very frustrating and very hard to deal with. And then it makes it confrontational. I don't think many of us want to be confrontational. We want to be partners, but we just need the help from inside sometimes.
Wow.
Y'all want to comment on all of that?
Okay. Let me just, hopefully Colleen's going to weigh in as well. But, you know, as a former plan director, I was cringing because my job is to make sure that does not happen, period. Now, if we have to go to on-call consultants to help, but to me, our job is to make sure that we are partners, not regulators, but partners in development. And for issues like that, I would have blown up and would have jumped on solving the problem right away. The easier one is on the staffs. I wouldn't say the easier one. The easier fix is to figure out how to get the staff capacity to make sure you get the answers and the services that you need. The more complicated one is that these are problems that we have to figure out together. And I don't want you coming in and saying you can't do that. I would instruct my staff to figure out how to help you reach success, because in the end, you're providing housing for people that is sorely needed. So it goes back to leadership. I'm not criticizing the current leadership, but to me, the role of a director is to direct, of staff is to make sure we are partners, that we do our end to make sure you have the services, the answers, and the solutions to make sure you're delivering the products that are sorely needed for people.
No, I agree. I think that's a really hard story to hear, but it's not uncommon, unfortunately. And I think the staff situation, it's a regional situation too. Raleigh, it's rough on Raleigh right now. When I was in Chapel Hill too, we rebuilt the staff, and it was a second job. It's a lot of work. But you're right, and Mitch is right too, that the goal for anyone that comes through the door of a planning department is to be a partner, and to figure out a solution together that's going to help move the project forward. And that's even if it's a really, really less than ideal project, trying to figure out how can we make this better for everyone. So that's something that I'm hopeful will happen. But I would say too, as far as the stormwater issue goes, that's really common here. I mean, I think that's probably stormwater, parking trees, all the time. Fire. And, oh, well, fire. But I feel like stormwater, it's an issue we have to figure out as like technical staff too. That's a lot of land that's getting taken up. That could be houses, and it's not always beautiful either to look at. So I think that's something that honestly as practitioners we need to figure out together. And I would say too, as far as timing and all of the other things you mentioned, that's also something that I would anticipate will be changed in the next few years with all these different zoning reforms. That's just something that I feel like is inevitable to happen. But hang in there.
I'll be brief to wrap it. I know Bob has like 1 million of your stories, so you should absolutely catch up with Bob after this. And I'll just say, literally the only reason I'm sitting up here is as an architectural intern, I was naive enough to call up counselors and staff directors and say, why the hell does this rule do this? Why did this project get stopped because of this? And it was naivety and it was bravery, but not just venting at the builder social, not just calling up your buddy, but calling up someone, what Bob and Aaron and Jim are doing in Durham is they took their list of stuff that you have in your notebook and they went to staff and they said, can we fix this? And I think you probably had 3 times as many as are actually getting fixed, but don't discount how important it is to just bring it to people's attention.
So for those who don't know me, I'm Holly Fracaro. I am so grateful to the leadership and the board. Again, please stand. This is not a normal thing for an HBA to do, and I'm really proud of all of you for putting this to your leaders and getting it approved. And this issue, I want to tell the staff, thank you for sitting through this. We're not mad at you. And I'm super proud of the partnership that our Home Builders Association has with the staff of every single one of our counties. We have a quarterly stakeholders meeting in every single county. So we've got one coming up with Chatham this month. If you're an HBA member and you're not coming to those, you're missing an opportunity to get a quarterback in. Bo and Sarah, we have like 50 people in our meetings. So attend those meetings, be the other side of the stakeholders group, right? If you have something to say, we have a fantastic working relationship with them. And so thank you, staff. Town of Chapel Hill, they went back to work, but we really do appreciate our partnerships. And so look to those of us who already have them established. John, let me know what I can do. I will be your quarterback until we get you one inside of the town. So please stay tuned for our 2024 Housing Summit. We will definitely bring batteries and extra coffee, and we will not have that issue again, but I appreciate you all spending so much time with us today and really look forward to seeing you again, and thank you for building places for people to live. Thank you.
People stuck around.
Yeah.
It's 11.